Okay, this is chapter 41 of Prodigy. Saturday, May 18th. 41. Hannah eventually managed to doze off toward the early hours, but it was a fitful sleep, full of dreams about her father. At first she wanted to linger in them. She wanted to keep looking at the sea trout he had caught, watching it writhe about on the rock, gasping for air. She wanted to feel the wet, salty squalls on her cheeks and nose. Her father had taken them fishing at Gronkhovik, on the northern tip of Öland, when she was 12. Later that evening he had told them their mother was ill. A sound tore her from the beach just as she was about to cast her line. Confused, she looked around in the soft dawn light and registered the drowsy thought that there was someone else there. But Hannah wanted to keep fishing. As she tried to make her way back to the rocks, she found herself in a house she didn't recognize. It was incredibly dark, but she could hear someone opening cupboards and drawers, rummaging around inside. A glass fell to the floor. She could hear footsteps drawing even closer and barely dared breathe. Before long they reached her. Arms gripped her, knocked her over. The man, his face was nothing but a dark shadow, but she was sure it was a man, kicked and hit her until it felt like every bone in her body was broken. He then poured something over her, making her skin and lungs burn. Gas. The sound of the match being struck against the box was like thunder. Hannah sat bolt upright, panting. She patted herself down, convinced she was on fire, convinced that the man was standing over her, watching it happen. Little by little she took in the room. The gray light on the sloping white ceiling boards, the chest of drawers, the only other piece of furniture apart from the bed. Her wardrobe was in the other small room. She was alone, but the lingering emotions from the dream sent tears spilling down her cheeks. Not out of fear at having come close to death, but out of trembling grief. Her father should be impossible to love, so why couldn't she help herself? Why couldn't she be like Christopher, simply forgetting and moving on? You should have stayed away. Yes, she should have. It was only 5 o'clock, but Hannah got up and moved over to the window, rolled up the blind, which had been a terrible purchase because it didn't fit properly. She remembered the drowsy thought that had come to her as she woke, that someone had woken her, that she wasn't alone. Hannah peered out the window, her fingertips brushing her grandmother's wooden nightingale. The fields stretched out as far as the eye could see, and she could only just make out the treetops on the horizons. No, she was simply spooked by the message and the calls. Hannah decided to go on a longer walk than usual. Getting some fresh air and exercise was the only thing that would really calm her down. She had lived close to the Nacka Nature Reserve in Stockholm and had often gone walking there. Today she followed the path south toward the water. The sky was full of heavy gray clouds and the wind whipped at her face. The weather had been bad that night in Gronkhovik, but it hadn't made a difference. I should get a fishing rod, she thought, as though she could recreate that one last day of happiness. If her niece ever came to visit, she would make sure to buy one. The heavens opened as she was halfway to Morbelonga, and she turned back. The trees provided some cover, but Hannah was soon drenched, and any lingering trace of the dream was washed away. She was just a few hundred meters from home when the rain finally stopped. Ingrid spotted her through the window and hurried out. It may be wonderful that it's raining, but why on earth are you out walking in this weather, woman? Ingrid had told Hannah she was hoping for rain. The past few summers had been hot and dry, causing difficulties for her son, who had taken over the family farm. It wasn't raining when I left, Hannah protested. She tugged at her damp jeans. The denim peeled away from her thighs with a sucking sound, but quickly clung to her legs again. So awful to hear about the murdered boy from Gardby, said Ingrid. Are you working on the case? Hannah nodded and glanced over at her house. I'm not so slow that I can't take a hint, said Ingrid, but I just want to say one thing. About the boy's father? Oh, said Hannah, a sense of panic drumming in her chest. Had the news that they were holding Axel already leaked? He's up to something in Gronghogen. Up to something? It was my son who told me. His wife works for the council. Do you know any more? No, but I can ask my son. Don't do that, Hannah shivered. Go in and get yourself warmed up, said Ingrid. I will, but Hannah peered over to her house again. Maybe this wasn't the right time to ask, but she knew the perfect moment would likely never arise. How much are people talking about me? In relation to your dad, you mean? Hannah nodded. The old birdies at Stitch and Bitch have been talking a bit, but they've got nothing better to do. Stitch and Bitch? My sewing circle, then, though I don't like that name. But you haven't heard anyone else say anything? No, it was all so long ago now, and they know you're not him. Thanks, said Hannah. What for? I feel a little bit better now. Though she was drenched, Ingrid gave her a hug. I saw there'd been a fire in Guardby, said Hannah. Do you know anything about that? The garage, you mean? Yes. There were rumors it was deliberate, but my money is on lightning. Oh, by the way, did you win on the horses on Wednesday? 54 kroner, Ingrid said with a smile. She turned and walked back toward her house. Stay inside next time, she called over her shoulder. Hannah nodded again. When she got home, Hannah peeled off her clothes and took a long hot shower in the tiny cubicle on the ground floor. If she knocked together a couple of rooms downstairs, she thought, she could have a much bigger bathroom with a tub. Once she was done, she got dressed, ate a hearty breakfast, and set off for the station. Should she show someone the message she had received? For some reason, it felt a little worse than the calls. It might also be traceable. She had Googled the number without success, and there wasn't much more she could do on her own. She needed to put a stop to this before it escalated into something worse. Hannah knocked on Ove's door. Since she was convinced there must be some kind of link to her father, she didn't want the others to see it. You should have stayed away. Ove read the words aloud. It almost looked like he was swilling them around in his mouth, tasting them like a vintage wine. This could be linked to the investigation, he said. One of the people you've spoken to. Most of them are 15 or 16. I doubt they'd write something like that. Maybe not, but we can't rule it out. So what do we do? I'll pass the number on to IT. They can look into it. Ove picked up a paper bag full of pastries from his desk and waved it in the air. I brought a special treat for the morning meeting. It's Saturday, after all. Aside from Ove and Hannah, Daniel and Eric were the only other people in the office, so they had the meeting at the table in their room. Daniel had dressed more casually than usual, in jeans and a t-shirt, and Hannah realized she preferred that look on him. It made him look softer, less like Fabian. This time she reciprocated his smile. She couldn't keep him at arm's length just because he happened to look like her ex. Ove bit off a chunk of his Danish pastry. The cyclist the Germans passed wasn't Axel Stansten, he said. Amir managed to get in touch with him yesterday. He didn't see anything as he cycled past the rest place. He's a bird watcher, and the reason he was in such a hurry was because there'd been a sighting of black-winged stilt. So why didn't he just drive? Asked Eric. His car's in for service. Ove took another bite of his pastry before he continued. Excuse me. Forensics also confirmed that the DNA we found on Joel's face belongs to Fanny Broberg. Not surprising considering she more or less admitted to spitting on him, said Hannah. But the selfie Joel took proves he was still alive after they beat him up. And now we've got Axel Stansten's fingerprints on the knife. Maybe we should bring Fanny in, said Daniel, in case Axel is telling the truth about the knife being a birthday present. Fanny beat up Joel, so isn't it more likely that she followed him? Ove pushed the last piece of pastry into his mouth and chewed as he made up his mind. Let's hold off on Fanny. Her prints weren't on the knife. Eric nodded. I think we should look into whether there's a link of some kind between Fanny and Axel Stansten, Hannah spoke up. Why? Asked Ove. Because of the hash. Axel smoked a lot in high school, and I think he sold it as well. Okay, then let's ask Fanny about that too. When are we interviewing Axel again? Asked Eric. In a few hours. I put the whole of forensics on tracking his movements after he left the office on Tuesday. I want to tell Rebecca, said Hannah. Hold off until after we've interviewed him, Ove told her. But it's going to end up leaking if it hasn't already. No, said Ove. "What should I do?" asked Daniel. It was obvious he wanted to diffuse the tension, and Hannah found herself wondering whether he had a lot of siblings. It would explain why he behaved like a typical middle child. If she and Christopher had had another sibling, things might have been different between them. But no, a third child would have just been yet another person to look after once their mother died. "Look into hate crimes in southern Oatland," said Ove, "particularly homophobic ones." "Do we know for sure he was gay?" "I spoke to IT again, and they found a forum for LGBTQ people that Joel was active on. They've contacted the admins to ask for his login details, so that might be something worth looking into. It's also something Eric and Hannah can talk to his family and friends about." Hannah wanted to argue. It didn't feel like that type of crime would happen in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. It was far more likely that the perpetrator knew Joel, though the two weren't mutually exclusive, of course, particularly not if Axel was who she thought he was. On more than one occasion she had heard him say that gay people were pedophiles. Ove rounded off by telling the others about the message Hannah had received, and she avoided meeting their eyes, didn't want to know what they thought. "Was the message from the same number as the calls?" asked Eric. Ove turned to Hannah so suddenly that he almost knocked his mug of coffee over. "What calls?" he demanded. Eric didn't even try to look sorry for having mentioned them. Could the man never shut up? Hannah had to grit her teeth to stop her anger from spilling out.